Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about a very infamous and high profile case that's honestly one of the most craziest cases I've ever heard about. It involves a murder, abuse, a very rare mental illness, fraud, and has one of the most insane plot twists that nobody saw coming. This case is also pretty controversial, so I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. So today we're going to be talking about a mother and a daughter, Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And from the outside, these two looked like a loving mother and daughter, but in reality, something very sinister was going on. I thought it would be a really good time to do this video because although this case happened in 2015, it's actually been in the news a lot recently because Gypsy is actually up for parole in December. So you may have heard a bit about this case recently, but don't know the whole story, so today we're gonna go through the entire case. But before we get into it, I just wanna say thank you so much for clicking on and watching this video. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe because that really helps my channel. This is a really new channel and it's so hard to get started on YouTube, so to those of you who leave such nice comments on all my videos, I just want you to know how much I really appreciate it. Anyway, just wanted to say that, so let's get into the case. So this case takes place in Missouri. Gypsy Rose Blanchard is the one with the glasses, and the woman beside her is her mother, Dee Dee. And Dee Dee was Gypsy's full-time caregiver because ever since she was just 3 months old, Gypsy suffered from a wide range of health issues, including leukemia and muscular dystrophy. Dee Dee and her husband, who was named Rod Blanchard, married when they were very young and only because Dee Dee found out that she was pregnant, but they separated shortly before Gypsy's birth in 1991. Once Gypsy was born, Dee Dee and Gypsy moved in with Dee Dee's family in New Orleans. When Gypsy was just a baby, she started to experience medical issues, and she was diagnosed with a chromosomal disorder and sleep apnea, which can be very dangerous for babies, and she was constantly in and out of the hospital because of this. Then, when she was just 8 years old, she was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, which made it so that she couldn't walk anymore, and she was going to spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. Shortly after that, Gypsy and Dee Dee received the horrible news that Gypsy had been diagnosed with leukemia, and she would likely die at a very young age, which is just every parent's nightmare. Gypsy had also begun to have vision and hearing problems as well as frequent seizures. And she also had to be fed through a feeding tube and she needed supplemental oxygen. Most of Gypsy's childhood was spent in the hospital, either in the emergency room or seeing doctors or specialists. Gypsy had stopped going to school entirely by the 2nd grade, possibly even as early as kindergarten because she was just too sick to go to school. Dee Dee used to work as a nurse's assistant, but because of her daughter's illnesses, she couldn't continue working because she had to take care of Gypsy. Luckily, they were able to stay afloat because of public financial assistance that was granted to them because of Gypsy's illnesses. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse for these two, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans and their home had been destroyed in the hurricane, and they were forced to move into a shelter for a bit, and then they later fled to Missouri. Once in Missouri, the story of a single mother with a severely disabled daughter forced to flee Katrina's devastation received a lot of media attention, and the community often pitched in and raised money to help Dee Dee. Habitat for Humanity actually built them a house because they were Katrina survivors and because of Gypsy's medical conditions. The home was in Springfield, Missouri, and it had a wheelchair ramp and a hot tub to accommodate for Gypsy's muscular problems. Many charities donated to Dee Dee and Gypsy for years. They had a GoFundMe, they stayed many times in the Ronald McDonald House during medical appointments, they received free flights to see doctors at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas, free trips to Disney World, and backstage passes to Miranda Lambert concerts via Make-A-Wish Foundation. Many people in Springfield, but also around the world, really connected with their story and were really inspired by Dee Dee's strength as a single mother raising a daughter with so many medical conditions. And many people who met Gypsy were charmed by her. She was only 5 feet tall, nearly toothless, had to wear large glasses for her vision problems, and Gypsy often wore wigs or hats to cover her baldness from her chemotherapy. And one thing you'll notice about Gypsy is she has a very high childlike voice. I'll put in some clips of her speaking. And this is because of her chromosomal disorder, which made her a lot younger mentally than she actually was.
I remember my mom had gave me this little glass house and she said, one day this will be real. Looking at the open ocean now, and it's beautiful.
And Dee Dee would often explain that she was just slow because of all her medical conditions. Overall, the public was really sympathetic for Gypsy and Dee Dee received a lot of praise for being such a loving and supportive mother. As for what happened to Gypsy's father, Rod, Dee Dee explained to her neighbors in Springfield that he was an abusive drug addict that never came to terms with the fact that his daughter had health issues, and he never sent them any money or tried to help Dee Dee with Gypsy at all. But luckily, Dee Dee was able to cover all of Gypsy's medical expenses through the GoFundMe and all the charities that donated to them. They also received lots of help from their neighbors and community who took them to appointments, brought Gypsy presents, made them meals, and just helped out in any way that they could for years. And as we can all imagine, these times were really difficult for Dee Dee and Gypsy. But they were managing, and despite being a severely disabled and sick child, there's lots of footage of Gypsy looking happy, and it seems like they were doing the best they could given the difficult situation that they were in. But that all came crashing down on June 14th, 2015, when some concerning posts were made by Dee Dee and Gypsy's shared Facebook account. And this really concerned their friends and neighbors. They thought it was probably hacking, but it was pretty hateful, so eventually the police were called. When the police showed up at their home, they entered and found Dee Dee dead in her bed, and she had been murdered. It was a very gruesome scene. Dee Dee had been stabbed in the back 17 times, and blood was just everywhere. And what was even more concerning is that Gypsy was missing. And the police and the community thought that an intruder had broken in, murdered Dee Dee, and kidnapped Gypsy. Her wheelchair was found in the home, and the community thought that she was just left helpless without all of her medications, which were also found in the home. So then a massive missing persons investigation was launched later that day. And this was huge news. Like, Gypsy and Dee Dee were kind of like public figures, and the community was just heartbroken that this mother who had already been through so much was murdered. Then one of the first things investigators did was try to track down where those Facebook posts were made from, and they eventually found the IP address, which led them to a man named Nicholas Godejohn. And through talking to neighbors and friends of Gypsy, police found out that Nicholas was actually Gypsy's online boyfriend. They had met on a Christian dating site, and he was a couple years older than Gypsy. He was 24 and she was 18 at the time. Nick lived in Wisconsin, and the two had been in a virtual romantic relationship since 2012. But Gypsy had to keep this relationship a secret from Dee Dee because she was very overprotective. Gypsy and Nick had met before in person when Nick made the trip out to Missouri, but Dee Dee actually caught them and Gypsy got in big trouble. Anyway, police tracked down Nick at his house in Wisconsin and brought him in for questioning. And once they started questioning him, he confessed right away to murdering Dee Dee Blanchard.
And I'll admit it, I did actually stab her, I will admit it.
And what was even more shocking is he claimed that Gypsy actually asked him to do it.
The only reason I did it is because I did it for me and her. That's the real reason I did it. I would have never did it if it was not for me and her.
Do you think that if Gypsy hadn't asked you to kill her mom, you'd ever killed her mom?
I know I wouldn't have done it.
Okay. You just did it because you loved Gypsy and Gypsy asked you to do it.
Yes.
So investigators found out that the two of them actually took a bus from Missouri to Wisconsin. It was a Greyhound bus. And when they looked at the security footage from the Greyhound station, they saw that Gypsy was walking on her own. She didn't have her wheelchair with her or her oxygen tank, and she was walking around completely fine. Police quickly made an announcement about the security footage and brought Gypsy in for questioning.
Okay, good morning. I want to specify at the beginning of this press conference that this is an ongoing investigation. And I want to start off with saying things are not always as they appear.
And the community was absolutely shocked and very confused. Where was her wheelchair? How was she walking? And as you probably guessed it, this entire thing was a scam orchestrated by Dee Dee Blanchard. Investigators began to unravel this very well executed scheme and confirmed that Gypsy was completely healthy. She didn't have cancer, she didn't have muscular dystrophy, and it was all just a big lie. Psychologists believe that Dee Dee actually had a very rare mental disorder called Munchausen Syndrome by proxy, Munchausen Syndrome is a psychological and behavioral condition in which somebody fabricates or induces symptoms of illness on themselves, while Munchausen Syndrome by proxy is when someone does it to another person. Usually a caregiver to a patient, and most commonly a parent to a child. And this is usually to gain sympathy, attention, and often financial compensation.
As soon as I was aware of the case, I started searching the internet and trying to acquire all the information I could. And it became one of the least difficult cases I've ever seen in establishing this as much as by proxy, which is when people make others under their control either sick or lie about their illnesses or exaggerate their illnesses, all to get some kind of emotional gratification for themselves.
Young lady, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, and her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, from Springfield, Missouri, to this day.
Dee Dee was a woman of fairly few accomplishments. There were relatively few things that distinguished her from the run-of-the-mill person, and that didn't suit her. So, having a sick child gave her a sense of identity, which was of the indefatigable, heroic caregiver who left others breathless with the excellence of her child rearing.
And always said, "You're the reason I was born to be your mama."
And Dee Dee took this to the extreme. She had been giving Gypsy medications she didn't even need for her entire life. Anti-seizure medication, heavy-duty painkillers, Xanax, and fed her through a feeding tube, which is really painful, when she didn't even need it.
I would have to put on the breathing machine every night. I hated it though, because it seemed to make my breathing worse, not better. And then another machine was for the feeding tube. It was controlling what I'd eat. My medications would be put through there. I really wouldn't even have to be awake, so she could put whatever in my body and I wouldn't even know.
Dee Dee did everything she absolutely could to convince Gypsy that she was actually sick and would regularly shave her head, telling her that her hair was gonna fall out anyway. And what's honestly the craziest part for me is that Dee Dee was able to convince doctors that Gypsy was sick. Some of them performed surgeries on Gypsy and prescribed her medications that she didn't even need. She was able to do this because she actually did have a lot of medical knowledge from working as a nurse's assistant, and she was very smart and just a really good con artist, and she made it seem so believable. She also told the doctors that all of Gypsy's medical records were lost in Hurricane Katrina, so that's why she didn't have to produce any proof. There were some doctors who were skeptical when tests came back showing that Gypsy didn't have any of the things that Dee Dee claimed that she did, and one of them even reported Dee Dee for possibly having Munchausen by proxy, but it just never went anywhere because Dee Dee was able to convince the investigators that Gypsy was actually sick. Dee Dee did have a criminal history though. She had been arrested for a couple of minor offenses, including writing bad checks.
Dee Dee wasn't a stranger to the law. She shoplifted. She was wanted for writing bad checks. She stole from many people. She would get so many credit cards underneath my dead mother's name and run up the bills like crazy. She was gonna do anything, anyway, anyhow to get her way.
And her family suspects that she might have tried to kill her stepmother by poisoning her food and starving her while caring for her in her old age. As for Gypsy, when she was younger, she genuinely believed that she was sick. And Dee Dee convinced her to be scared, and she thought that she was genuinely going to die young. But as she got older, like into her teen years, she realized that she could walk and she didn't feel sick, and she started to become more aware of what was actually going on. Dee Dee would physically and psychologically abuse her daughter, always holding her hand in public, and whenever Gypsy said something that either suggested that she was not genuinely sick or seemed above her supposed mental capabilities, Gypsy recalls that her mother would give her a tight hand squeeze. And when the two were alone, Dee Dee would physically abuse her with a coat hanger. And what's also just so cruel is Dee Dee lied to Gypsy and everyone about her age. She actually led everyone to believe that Gypsy was 5 years younger than she actually was, and she was able to get away with this because she claimed that Gypsy's birth certificate was lost in Hurricane Katrina. And it wasn't until this whole thing was uncovered that Rod, her father, brought forth her birth certificate and found out that she was 5 years older than Gypsy genuinely thought that she was. When she was arrested, Gypsy actually thought she was 18 when she was really 23 years old. According to him, Rod tried to be involved in his daughter's life as much as he could, but Dee Dee always kept him at a distance. He and his second wife tried to visit Gypsy many times in Springfield, but Dee Dee would always change the plans for a variety of reasons. Everything Dee Dee said about Gypsy's father was yet another lie, and Rod tried to call Gypsy throughout her life, but Dee Dee would rarely let him speak to her. Because Gypsy didn't go to school, she was completely isolated from the outside world and entirely controlled by Dee Dee. Gypsy tried to escape once, but Dee Dee ended up tracking her down and brought her home and handcuffed her to her bed for 2 weeks and starved her. Dee Dee convinced her that if she ever tried to tell anyone or run away, she had paperwork to prove that she was mentally incompetent and that nobody would believe her. But still, Gypsy rebelled and created a bunch of secret Facebook accounts to talk to people online. So let's jump back to 2014 when police tracked down Nick and they bring Gypsy in for questioning. At first, she tried to deny everything and acted like she didn't know that her mother was murdered.
If you're involved in anything that I'm about ready to tell you, then you need to tell me, okay? Your mom's dead, okay? Now, what I want to ask you is, your mom's passed away, okay? And she's deceased, all right? Now, what I want to ask you, did you have involvement in this? Okay. Hang on, listen to me for just a second, okay? What happened with your mom that night?
I don't know what happened with my mom at all.
Okay, just listen to me, okay, sweetheart? You know what happened to your mom, okay? And I know that you know.
But the police had already spoken to Nick and were onto her, so she ended up admitting that she did ask Nick to kill her mother. She explained everything that had been going on for her entire life, all the abuse, all the torture, and she explained that she was just desperate to get away from Dee Dee. So she tells Nick that this is the only way out for her, and if they want to be together, Dee Dee has to be dead. And Nick did it because he loved her and was pretty obsessed with their relationship, and he told investigators he would do anything for her.
I really do worship her to the point that I won't do for her.
Okay. Well, I think you've proved that.
Both Gypsy and Nick were in agreement that Nick was the one that actually killed Dee Dee. Investigators also found out that Nick was autistic and he had a very low IQ. And Nick's defense team really argued that this is how Gypsy was able to manipulate him into committing the murder because he wasn't able to really think it through. So the two of them cooked up this little plan and they had actually been contemplating it for a year before they actually did it. Nick traveled from Wisconsin to Missouri on the night of the murder, and Gypsy let him into their house, handed him gloves, a knife, and duct tape, and Gypsy hid in the bathroom and plugged her ears while Nick murdered Dee Dee. But Gypsy said that she was actually the one who wrote the Facebook posts, and she did this because she wanted the police to find Dee Dee's body. And when asked why she didn't just commit the murder herself, she explained that she was just too squeamish to do it and she didn't like blood. Gypsy was charged with second-degree murder for her part in it, and Nick was charged with first-degree murder because he was the one who actually did it. Gypsy testified at Nick's trial and said that she was the one that suggested to Nick that he kill Dee Dee to end her mother's abuse.
Whose idea was it to kill your mother?
Mine.
Why did you want to kill your mother?
Because I wanted to be free of her hold on me.
Did you and Nick ever talk about this?
Yes,
Who initially brought up killing your mother?
I did.
Who talked you into killing your mother?
I did. I talked him into it.
Nick's defense team tried to argue that because of his autism and low IQ that he did have diminished responsibility, but ultimately the prosecution argued that he knew what he was doing the entire time and he knew that it was wrong. Even if he was manipulated and given an ultimatum, he didn't have to stab her 17 times. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours and found Nick guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. So he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Gypsy, on the other hand, ended up taking a plea deal because the evidence was so strong against her, and she was sentenced to 10 years in prison for second-degree murder. After the disclosure of how Dee Dee had treated Gypsy for her whole life, the public really had sympathy for her as a long-term victim of child abuse, rather than seeing her as a murderer, basically. A lot of people think that 10 years was actually too long of a sentence given what she had been through. I mean, since birth, this poor girl was psychologically and physically abused, deprived of a normal life, isolated from society, never was able to form any normal relationships. So much so that it's like she's already been in prison her entire life. But still, some people think that 10 years was too lenient and that at the end of the day, murder is murder. She faced a lot of scrutiny for not just telling someone what was going on, but I don't think we could ever understand what life was like for her and what was going on in her mind. And I imagine she wanted to just take the sure bet that would allow her to be free from Dee Dee. But let me know what you guys think of that sentencing in the comments. So Gypsy says that the time that she's spending in prison is actually better than any time she's spent on the outside so far in her life. And her father and his new wife often visit her in prison, and they're finally able to have the relationship that he always wanted, which is nice. Gypsy said that she's focused on trying to grow as a person so that when she is released, she's ready to re-enter society. While in prison, she completed several self-improvement courses, and she recently became a facilitator of a program called Impact of Crime on Victims class. And she's also writing a book on everything that she went through. Gypsy has watched her story be told through a bunch of different documentaries and a reenactment series called The Act. It's on Hulu, but I haven't watched it because Gypsy said that it actually wasn't an accurate portrayal of everything that happened, so after I heard that, I just didn't really want to watch it. Anyway, Gypsy is writing this book in prison so she can tell her story in her own words. And she says that the details about when the book will come out haven't been finalized yet, but she's hoping that her story will help other victims of child abuse. So let's fast forward to the present day. Gypsy is 29 years old and has served more than half her sentence at a correctional center in Missouri. While there isn't a set date on when she'll be released from prison, she is eligible for parole at the end of 2023, and her parole hearing is in December, so she could be released soon after that. If the parole board believes that she's learned from her crimes and is ready to re-enter society, it won't be long before she's a free woman. That would mean that she finally has a chance at a normal life in her 30s. However, there is a lot of controversy about her release. In fact, a couple of her family members actually spoke out about their concerns about her release. Apparently, she refuses to take part in the therapy that the prison offers, and she says that she doesn't need help, which is pretty shocking. There's no doubt that she'll need a very strong support system if she's released, because she never really knew how society worked in the first place, so she'll definitely have a more difficult time adjusting compared to other prisoners who were released. So I can understand that, but her family also said that the only life she knows is what Dee Dee taught her, and that's to scam and manipulate people, so they're worried that she might actually just end up back in prison. She also supposedly acts pretty irrational and lashes out in prison, and her family says that she needs to change this behavior before she's released. Her family's also worried about how she's going to form relationships, especially with men. And it seems like this is coming from the fact that she's had 3 relationships with men while she's been in prison. And she even got married to one of them, but quickly separated from him 4 months later. And it seems like they think that she had a lack of judgment in those relationships. And I imagine they're probably worried that she'll get taken advantage of. It seems like, according to her family, Gypsy has a lot of work to do to cope with what she went through if she wants to have a chance at finally living a normal life, as much as a person can after everything that she's been through. The story is really sad, and there's so many victims in this case, like Dee Dee, Nick, Gypsy, all the people that were scammed by them. Anyway guys, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it interesting. Please let me know your thoughts on this case and the sentencing in the comment section below. I'll see you next time, guys.